This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The French military suspends its joint operation with Malian troops. Nigeria steps up rescue efforts for abducted students. And new reports show the COVID-19 pandemic has driven Africa into recession for the first time in 30 years. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. In business, China slams President Joe Biden's decision to ban U.S. investments in companies it says are linked to China's military. And in sports, Japan's top medical advisor set to issue the views of medical experts on holding the Olympics. In our top story this hour, France says it is suspending its joint military operations with Malian troops. The move is part of efforts to pressure Mali's military junta into restoring a civilian-led government. France's Ministry of Armed Forces says French soldiers will continue operating independently in Mali, pending a reassessment of the decision. Mali's military arrested interim President Bando and Prime Minister Mokhtar Ouane last week and pressured them to resign. Now, this has derailed the country's path towards democratic elections following last year's military coup. Former Vice President Assimi Goïta, who led the August coup and last week's revolt, was declared president last Friday. West African Regional Bloc, ECOWAS, and the African Union have now suspended Mali from their respective organizations and threatened sanctions. Well, let's bring you the very latest on this story. We have with us from Paris, CGTN's Ross Cullen. We will come to him in just a moment. First, let's get the latest from Mali. And for that, we're joined by Paul Logerier, a Mali-based journalist. Paul, what has been the reaction so far to this decision by France to suspend military ties with Mali?
Well, hello, Lindy. The news came up just yesterday night, so we don't know that much about Malian reaction for now. It's a bit soon. I called yesterday Commandant Baba Cissé, who was the special advisor to Assimi Goïta, the president of the transition, and he didn't want to comment. I called as well the Malian army, and they said since this is a political matter, they don't want to comment as well. But I was talking with a Malian politician yesterday, and he told me that this kind of decision could lead to another coup. On WhatsApp group, especially WhatsApp group with people from north of Mali, the news has been welcomed pretty badly, especially from those people where Barkhane evolves, actually. But I'm sure we will know more about those reactions this afternoon because a huge protest is organized by many movements to celebrate the IM5 RFP, which is a movement which led to the coup of last August.
Well, Paul, we know that certainly in some parts of Mali, France's presence had become increasingly unpopular. Does the country, though, have the capacity to go it alone, especially in the area of security?
Well, France is not that unpopular. Those are a group of people who are against the presence of Barkhane. But to answer your question, I don't think Malian army is today ready to face the terrorist risk on this national territory. I was talking with many officers from Malian army, and they basically told me that the Malian army is on its knee. So this is why it exists many training missions, such as UCAP Sahel for gendarmerie, or the UTM, the European Union Training Mission for militaries. And also it exists some activities from Barkhane to train Malian military, sorry, on the operation, which is totally like the main objective of Barkhane, to train Malian militaries for them so that France could live.
And it does potentially leave Mali in a somewhat vulnerable position. Thank you so much, Paul Logerier, joining us there from Mali. Well, now let's bring in Ross Cullen, who joins us live from Paris. Ross, as we understand it, France is saying that its troops will continue to operate in Mali, but only independently. What exactly does this mean?
Well, Lindy, what it means is what is not ending is Operation Barkhane. France has more than 5,000 troops, fighter jets, armoured personnel carriers across the area of the G5 nations in Mauritania, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger and Chad, those loosely governed areas of the southern Sahara-Sahel region where France is engaged in trying to disrupt and dismantle the armed groups operating in that area. The overall mission of Operation Barkhane will be continuing. What is ending is that support for Mali's national forces, suspension of military aid to Mali's national army, the embedding of French planning officers, liaison officers working with the Malian national forces to help them on their missions, also to try to eradicate the armed groups. That is going to be suspended pending a review that France has demanded from Mali, that there will be a civilian-led government imposed sooner rather than later.
And Ross, of course, the end goal of all of this is to resolve the crisis in Mali. So apart from suspending military ties, is France pushing any other efforts to try and resolve the situation?
We have heard an enhancement of the rhetoric in the last couple of days. We've heard from Emmanuel Macron, the French president, describing what has happened as an unacceptable coup d'etat within a coup d'etat, because, as you mentioned, it's the second such military takeover of the government in 9 months. The first one in August 2020, France denounced, but also was willing to bite its lip if it did eventually end up in a civilian-led democratic government in Mali. But now what we have seen is the second such coup d'etat taking place, and so France has had to make this major move of suspending military aid, but it is working with the partners that you mentioned, working with the Economic Community of West African States, working with the African Union, which has demanded an unhindered, transparent and rapid restoration of civilian-led rule in Mali, and that is something that France wants to see as well. Also, Paris reserving the right, perhaps, to go even further, to double down on Mali if it's not satisfied with the guarantees it is demanded to receive from Bamako. Lindy?
Well, a turbulent 9 months indeed. Thank you so much, Ross Cullen, joining us there live from Paris. Well, CGTN's Daniel Arap-Moy now reports on France's continued involvement in security operations in Mali.
The Mali political crisis was triggered by an armed Tuareg rebellion in January 2012. France quickly launched an operation codenamed Serval in 2013. It was in response to gains made by the insurgent groups north of the capital Bamako. Operation Serval sought to host Islamic militant groups out of the country. In 2014, another French-led operation called Barakni replaced Serval in the name of Collective Security of the Sahel. But despite efforts by France, instability has spread due to attacks by a range of groups, some linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. The security situation has since worsened, with French President Emmanuel Macron now threatening to withdraw troops from Mali.
Nous avons condamné avec la plus grande fermeté.
What the rebel military officers have done again is unacceptable. Coup within a coup. That calls for our immediate condemnation, and also the fact that we are ready, within the next few hours, if the situation was not clarified, to declare targeted sanctions against the protagonists.
Insecurity across West Africa and the Sahel has expanded into areas previously considered safe. Militants have continued to stage deadly attacks, leaving hundreds of civilians dead. France, with a strong force of 5,100 troops in the Sahel region, has been battling several Islamic militant groups. The troops have been supporting government forces in Mali, Mauritania, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Chad since 2013. It's feared that any withdrawal of the French troops could lead to militants linked to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State strengthening their foothold across the region. Daniel Arap Moi, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, staying with this story, let's bring you some analysis now. We're joined by Justin Dua from the Electoral Institute for Sustainable Democracy in Africa. He's with us from Abidjan. Thank you so much for joining us, Justin. What do you make of this move by France, considering it was planning to disengage its troops in Mali anyway in the run-up to presidential elections?
Thank you very much. I think the current situation in Mali is frightening, but not very surprising, because the presence of the 5,100 troops in the region has been a debate for a while. It was about reducing, withdrawing, and now they are saying that they are not withdrawing, but France is just suspending joint military operation with Malian forces, which is a good thing, if not a total withdrawal. And also say that they will continue operating secretly. And if they communicate, conservatoire et temporaire, it means there will be a reassessment of the decision, which is a good thing.
We do apologize for that. We seem to be having some trouble with sound there with Justin Dua. Of course, he was joining us there from Abidjan. Well, let's turn to news now coming from South Sudan. The United Nations mission in the country says it plans to increase military patrols as the level of violence increases in the country. A local government in the eastern part of the country has suspended aid operations for a week after a humanitarian worker was reportedly assaulted by youth in the area. CGTN's Patrick Oyet has more.
South Sudan's government says there has been an increase in the number of attacks along major roads in the country. There is also a rise in intercommunal violence. Some of the attacks are as a result of cattle rustling. 2 aid workers were killed last month. Humanitarian supplies from UNICEF were looted in the Pibor administrative area in the eastern part of the country. That followed an outbreak of communal violence. The UN's World Food Program says some 550 metric tons of food, enough to feed 33,000 food insecure people for a month, were looted and more destroyed in Jonglei State. The head of the UN mission in South Sudan has described the growing violence against aid workers in the country as damaging development. The UN says it is working to help South Sudan's government to try and address the security challenges.
While it is first and foremost the responsibility of the government and its security forces to protect citizens from violence, the UN is doing everything it can to help create a more secure environment. We are rebalancing our military peacekeepers to take a more nimble, robust and proactive approach to the protection of civilians.
The increase in attacks on aid workers is partly related to economic difficulties. Many host communities say aid agencies do not help provide job opportunities. South Sudan's government says it is working to address the problem. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Ethiopia has announced it's undertaking a wide range of humanitarian activities in the Tigray region. According to the UN's Humanitarian Affairs Office, more than 5 million people in Tigray are in need of aid. The press secretary in the office of the Prime Minister told journalists the government wants to restore normalcy in the region. The Federal Attorney General says they are also instituting investigations and prosecutions against TPLF members of the National Defense Forces who are suspected of alleged crimes.
The need to support our people in the Tigray region recover from the current suffering is a primary responsibility of the government of Ethiopia, which it takes very seriously and is undertaking within the means available to it. Ethiopia has also shown readiness and an open will to positively and constructively engage with all partners, local and international. The government categorically rejects accusations of decimation of a people as a policy. Such is not the heartbeat of the administration.
Military prosecutors and the military police have conducted their own investigation, and so far they have pressed charges against 28 soldiers who have been suspected of killing civilians in situations where there were no military necessity. The trials of these suspects are underway, and the verdicts are expected to be handed down shortly. Furthermore, the military prosecutors have also pressed charges against 25 soldiers who have been suspected of committing acts of sexual violence and rape. The trials of these suspects are also underway.
Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Ugandan President Museveni to outline his plan for the government in his State of the Nation address. New reports show the COVID-19 pandemic has driven Africa into recession for the first time in 30 years. Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climate and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories. Let's have a look. We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Aden, Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice. Let's start in Nigeria now, where authorities are attempting to secure the return of 136 students abducted by gunmen on Sunday. The children, some as young as 5 years old, were kidnapped from an Islamic school in northern Nigeria. On Sunday, an armed gang on motorcycles attacked the town of Tejina. State officials contacted parents in the days that followed to determine exactly how many children were missing. The federal government initially estimated that 200 children had been abducted. Criminal gangs have been blamed for the rise in kidnappings for ransom in northern Nigeria in recent months. More than 800 students have been abducted since December. For more on this, we're now joined by our correspondent, Tesem Akende, live with us from Jos in northern Nigeria. Tesem, police are said to be trying to track the route the kidnappers took with the children. Give us more details on efforts to rescue these students.
Well, apart from the police, we would like to also tell you that there has been aerial surveillance by the Air Force to all in a bid to try and rescue these children. Contact, according to the government, has been established with the abductors, and they're actually demanding several millions of Nigerian naira, as ransom. The government has insisted that it will not pay ransom for these children to be released. What we can also tell you is that the government says 11 of those children have been released, with the abductors saying that the children were actually too young for them to keep. So efforts are ongoing. The police, have continued to be on their trail, but contact has been established by the government and, of course, by parents of these children. Aerial surveillance is also ongoing, as the search and rescue operations continue.
And as you say, authorities are determined not to pay any form of ransom to rescue these students. How has that been received by families? Are they satisfied that enough is being done to free the students?
Well, all the families are concerned about is to have their children back, to have their children who went out to learn, to acquire Islamic education. That's all they want. And so be it ransom, be it whatever means, dialogue or what other options, all they want is to have their children back and safe. Just this morning, the parents of these children had their representatives on a local TV station here in Nigeria, advocating and pleading on the abductors to have to release their children. Like I told you, 11 of the children are actually back, with the abductors saying they were actually too young to be held captive
So the parents are pleading and, using dialogue, demanding that they be merciful and release the other children as well. The government still insists that it will not pay ransom, and so dialogue is the option they are actually putting to use. We're hopeful and we're watching, and we're actually hoping that these children will actually be released, safely.
Indeed, and it is somewhat comforting to know that the 11 youngest children were released. Thank you so much, Tessem Akende, joining us there from Jos in Nigeria. Now, the significant escalation in kidnappings in Nigeria in recent months has activists sounding the alarm. Pressure is mounting on the government to do much more to protect citizens amid questions over what is driving this latest surge. Thousands have been kidnapped and even hundreds killed by religious extremists in the last few months. But as our Nigeria correspondent Tessem Akende reports, extremists are not the only culprits.
Tasigata and her husband Nehemiah have been kidnapped not just once but several times. They used to live in a particularly dangerous suburb of Jos where kidnapping is on the rise. Tasi identifies their abductors as members of the Fulani tribe, blamed by several groups as driving the surge of crime in Nigeria. She believes the repeated invasions were a deliberate move to have them relocate from the area. Luckily for the Gatas, friends and family helped pay the ransom each time they were kidnapped.
They just came and put the gun on us and said, go, we must go. And I told my husband, because I know my husband has health issues, I told him, stay, let me go. But I was so angry as we traveled through the night. They took me to another different route this time. And it seems the people are not all of them know the route. They don't know the terrain. We keep missing ourselves on the road, in the bush, so that at a time we had to just sleep on the ground without reaching their camp.
Kidnapping for ransom has become big business in Nigeria. The Kaduna state government in the country's northwest says 949 people were kidnapped in the state in the first quarter of 2021 alone. A non-governmental organization in the country, Inter-Society, says more than 2,000 people have been abducted in Nigeria this year. Experts point to the sheer numbers of people joining criminal gangs specializing in kidnapping.
You have more people being recruited into banditry, kidnapping, than you have into the security services in the country. In the south, you're talking about millions, and then even their targets are not just commuters in commercial buses like they do in Northwest, where they just stop a commercial bus and pick the people. They target prominent people.
Analysts say kidnapping is a quick money maker for bandits in the Northwest, but it's about resource control in the Niger Delta region and a means of pursuing ideology in the Northeast.
What you heard in the Niger Delta was agitation for resource control first. They wanted a situation whereby they will inflict some pain and then get the attention of the federal government. That was different. But Northeast, it's ideology. Whatever made them come into kidnapping started differently. They do it now, not for ransom, but as a bargaining chip. You're holding our commanders, give us our people, and then we'll give you back the kidnapped children. Not necessarily for money, because in the Northeast, their source of funding, until lately, was very far away from kidnapping.
Tasigata and her husband have been forced to put their house on sale and move to a safer part of town.
It's a dream house that we have been working on for years, just trying to improve it a little bit at a time, thinking of retirement, thinking of maybe this is going to be our old age residence, where we're going to be going about with our grandchildren and stuff like that. But all those is no longer happening.
The Nigerian government says it is working hard to address the problem of kidnapping and other security concerns in the country. One such measure is the presidential green light for security personnel to shoot at anyone in possession of firearms illegally. Another government initiative involves amnesty for repentant insurgents and financial incentives to get legitimate small-scale businesses off the ground. Regional authorities are also trying to coordinate more while beefing up legislation for state policing. For now, Tassigata and her husband are trying to stay out of harm's way, knowing that their own personal safety is something they no longer take for granted. Tessem Akende, CGTN Jos, Nigeria.
Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni is set to deliver the State of the Nation address at the official opening of the country's 11th Parliament. Museveni, who is serving a new 5-year term after 35 years in power, is expected to present a broader plan for his government's priority sectors. The address comes as the country registers a rise in COVID-19 infections. The Ugandan leader is also expected to tell the country how he plans to rejuvenate the economy amid a growing pandemic. Uganda is also dealing with cross-border issues with Rwanda. The security situation at home is also troubling following previous murders and attempted assassinations on key government officials. The latest attack targeted the Minister for Works and Transport. Well, joining us now for more is our correspondent, Leon Senyange, live in Kampala. Leon, a lot of important issues potentially on the president's agenda. What are Ugandans expecting from the State of the Nation address?
Well, that address should be in the next 30 minutes, so where President Museveni will be meeting and addressing several of, the new members of parliament, but even still, the whole nation. Many Ugandans will be glued to their television sets and radio sets, listening out to the president. This will be his second major address since his inauguration in May, and definitely there's a lot on table for President Yoweri Museveni to be discussing and telling the nation. And like you had highlighted earlier, the economy will be one of the key issues there, and because entirely Uganda, like several other countries across the world, has been drastically hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, and trying to find measures that should bring Uganda's economy back to the surface will be things that many are keen on listening to. The other emerging issue certainly is insecurity. Uganda over the past few years has had trouble with its neighbors, Rwanda, but even still the pockets of insurgents in the western part in neighboring DRC, but also internally. Just this week, the Minister of Works and Transport, also a former Chief of Defense Forces, General Katumba Wamala, had an assassination attempt. That, of course, has put the government much in the spot in terms of insecurity. President Museveni is definitely expected to say quite a lot about that particular issue. But then again, the key issue is the COVID-19 pandemic and how Uganda is trying to deal with it, given the fact that now cases are on the rise.
Thank you so much for that, Leon Senyange, live with us in Kampala. Now, the World Health Organization says Africa is far from ready to cope with a third wave of COVID-19. According to the UN body, the continent is still grappling with inadequate vaccine deliveries, an increase in the number of infections, and healthcare systems that are struggling to cope with the surge. Africa has officially registered more than 4.8 million cases and 130,000 deaths. This represents 2.9% of global cases and 3.7% of deaths. According to a survey conducted by the WHO in May, the essential health facilities and personnel required to manage critically ill patients are grossly inadequate in many African countries. Of 23 nations surveyed, most had less than one intensive care unit bed per 100,000 people, and only 1/3 had mechanical ventilators. In comparison, countries like Germany and the United States have more than 25 beds per 100,000 people. According to Our World in Data, only 2% of Africans have received at least one vaccine shot. That's compared with 11% of the world's population. 6 of Africa's 54 countries have not kicked off vaccination campaigns. They include Tanzania, Burundi, Eritrea, and Chad. Well, the WHO has warned of a surge in COVID-19 cases across Africa, and in just this past week, 8 countries are reported to have witnessed an abrupt rise of over 30% in cases. CGTN's Daniel Arap Moy has more.
The increase in cases comes as COVID-19 vaccine shipments continue to slow down. According to the World Health Organization, nearly 20 African countries have used up more than 2/3 of their doses.
We're seeing rising cases in South Africa and in countries like Uganda and Namibia, and cases have increased abruptly in 8 countries, including Sierra Leone, Guinea-Bissau, and Nigeria in the past 7 days.
Many African countries have not managed to follow up with second doses for high-risk groups. As the continent struggles with vaccine shortages, the care of critically ill COVID-19 patients is also lagging.
Among 23 African countries responding to a WHO survey in May this year, only 5 have more than 5 ICU beds per 100,000 people, and most countries, unfortunately, have less than 1 ICU bed per 100,000. This reflects decades long of underinvestment in health systems, among many other competing priorities. These capacities are desperately needed now and need to be ready to face future threats.
WHO is working to ramp up COVID-19 treatment capacity in Africa. The organization has deployed 21 experts to 8 countries to assist in the clinical care of critically ill patients. The health body says $2 million worth of essential commodities like oxygen concentrators have also been secured. Daniel Arap Moi, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
A new report indicates that although Africa may have been spared the worst of the COVID-19 death tolls, the continent does face recession, growing violence, and higher unemployment rates due to the pandemic. The 2021 Ibrahim Forum report shows that the global economic shutdown has driven Africa into recession for the first time in 30 years. Conflict resolution and counterinsurgency efforts, according to the report, were scaled back, opening doors for extremist groups to capitalize on the pandemic. The report was released ahead of the annual conference of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, which promotes good governance in Africa. For more on this, we're now joined by Jay Naidu, a board member at the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. He joins us via Zoom from Johannesburg. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Naidu. The report, of course, echoes what has been discussed before about the impact of COVID-19 on livelihoods across Africa. However, the particular focus seems to be on a recession and on violence. Tell us more about the report's key findings.
Well, thank you very much for having me on your show. And yes, I think there has been, from our research, a coordinated approach by leadership. But the whole pandemic and the length it's taken has also exposed severe problems and weaknesses related to the structural resilience of our healthcare systems, the economic model that we are pursuing that has been, exposed in terms of economic growth. And so, yes, although we have only 3% of reported cases, and we account for 18% of the world's population. So certainly at the economic level, we begin to see that the absence, say, of an industrial base, the fact that we are commodity producing economies that are very susceptible to the global economy and what's happening there has demonstrated that. And our absence of a strong industrial base has been explicitly revealed in the way in which we see vaccine manufacture and distribution, to an extent where we're almost witnessing a type of vaccine apartheid, where the majority of doses of the vaccine have been bought up by developed countries far ahead of their production. And so, yes, this does display certain weaknesses that require us as Africa to think about what the African agenda would be in the recovery period, and what is the economy we want to see in Africa.
And of course, according to the report, Jay, Africa was the only continent where incidents of violence rose over the course of the pandemic. What do you attribute this to?
Well, I think the response by some of our governments have been pretty authoritarian. So what we're starting to see from the data is the closing of civic space, the ability of people to participate in voicing their opinions, the way in which they can input into the new policies that are rising. And I think in the context that governments have been facing, many governments have chosen the iron fist approach rather than engagement approach and finding a social consensus, because let's acknowledge the fact that in a continent which is facing huge endemic poverty, hunger, the fact that a lot of our work in the economy is informal or agricultural linked, we have to acknowledge that closing down that has affected people's ability to just survive. And so there are consequences that require us to look more deeply at the type of integration we need in Africa, the economic integration, the way in which we strengthen the healthcare systems across the board, and make sure that we don't avoid, again, in our focus on COVID, that we're ignoring other major challenges that we've had in health delivery in the continent, which is HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, etc. So ultimately, it requires an integrated approach in which we rely on our own resources. We build up our own capacity and skills to manage not just this pandemic, but future pandemics that we definitely know will come.
Indeed. And when you talk about the Africa that we want to see in the future, what is the key element when it comes to a recovery strategy for the continent?
Well, I think in particular, we have to see that the involvement of young people, because demographically, 60% of the 1.3 billion Africans in our continent are now under 25, and that is increasing. We want to see the involvement of women, particularly because 90% of our food is produced by women in Africa. And we want to see a strategy that harnesses our resources and assets, which includes people, but also includes tremendous assets that fuel the global economy. And if we are smart about this, we can move from being the epicenter of hunger to being the breadbasket of the world. We can address energy, the access to clean energy, which deprives close to 700 million people the right to clean energy. We can look at a strategy that harnesses clean energy and harnesses the resources that are available to pursue a different growth model, so that we're not just exporting our wealth, our commodities. And so we build resilience in the way we have an African economy going into the future.
Well, clearly these solutions are there. Let's hope the political will follow. Thank you so much, Jane Naidu, joining us via Zoom from Johannesburg. Now, the Chadian government has received a donation of COVID-19 vaccines from Chinese pharmaceutical company Sinopharm. The North African nation is expected to start its vaccination campaign on Friday, with priority given to health personnel and the elderly. Speaking during the handover ceremony at N'Djamena International Airport, Chinese ambassador to Chad, Li Jinjin, called on other developed economies to join the fight against COVID-19 by empowering developing nations through such endeavors.
China strongly believes that the vaccine should be a global public good. Despite domestic demand, we have delivered on our promise by delivering the vaccine to more than 80 developing countries in urgent need. Some say China is conducting vaccine diplomacy. My answer is simple. China does not want to monopolize this diplomacy. We invite others to do the same.
Your business news coming up next. Still ahead, China slams a ban on U.S. investments in companies Biden's administration says are linked to China's military. And Nigeria is still struggling to bring its citizens into the regulated financial system.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
In your business news, U.S. President Joe Biden has signed an executive order that expands a ban on U.S. investments in companies Washington says are linked to China's military. Thursday's move extends a Trump-era blacklist to China's defense and surveillance technology sectors. The amended order says the ban would take effect on August 2nd for those companies currently listed, and the Treasury Department will update on a rolling basis the new list of about 59 companies. A spokesperson from the Chinese Foreign Ministry says China will take necessary measures to safeguard the legitimate rights and interests of Chinese companies.
The move severely disrupts normal market rules and order. It not only undermines the lawful rights and interests of the Chinese companies, but also hurts the interests of global investors, including those in the U.S. The U.S. should respect rule of law and the market, correct its mistakes, and stop actions that undermine the global financial market order and investors' lawful rights and interests.
The 24th St. Petersburg International Economic Forum has kicked off in Russia's second largest city with strict health and safety measures. Entrepreneurs will talk about building ties for the pandemic and post-pandemic era over the next few days. China and Russia saw an increase in mutual trade. Among the reasons, shared land borders, expanding railway connections and trading in mutual currencies. Alyoska Milenkovic brings us one Russian company that has been taking advantage of the improved trade ties with China.
This is Russia's prime quality Angus beef. Packed, stacked, and kept in a cold environment in this storage facility in Moscow, ready to be shipped to China. It is produced in Voronezh, some 500 kilometers south of Moscow, in an eco-clean and pristine environment. In the middle of a rampaging epidemic, the company that produces these prime steaks started exports to China.
Our processing capacity is 40,000 tons per year, and our expectations for this year are to export around 2,500 tons. And if we are looking forward to the next year, those figures could be better, depending on how the Chinese market accepts our products.
This isn't the only example of a Russian company which has started exporting to China. Most of those new exporters focus on agricultural products, which Russia is producing more and more of. As a result of this increased interest in China's market, agricultural exports from Russia rose by 17.6% in the first quarter of this year alone. And last year, Russian beef exports to China just exploded with a 25-fold increase.
Trade volume is increasing at cosmic-like speeds. Compared with last year, or even until the coronavirus pandemic started, it's like the sky and the earth. It's being seen even in areas with more exporting difficulties due to laws and regulations, like meat and milk exports.
Exporters of other food products like chocolate and candy have far fewer regulatory hurdles for exporting to China. And they are using those opportunities. Overall trade between China and Russia in 2020 reached just over $107 billion, and 25% of that figure was traded in the national currencies. The pandemic just sped up both processes, which will have a massive positive impact on their economies at the end of the day. Alyosha Milenkovic, CGTN, St. Petersburg.
In Nigeria, 36% of adults do not have a bank account. This is according to EFINA, a UK-backed development organization that seeks to bolster inclusive finance in Nigeria. The organization also says that job losses tied to the pandemic and social distancing measures hurt efforts to broaden access to banks. The figure was little changed from 2 years ago and well above the government's goal of 20%, which it set in 2013. Nigeria, Africa's most populous country, has sought to bring more of its citizens into the formal financial sector as part of efforts to modernize its economy. Commodity prices in South Sudan remain exorbitant despite recent gains made by the South Sudanese pound against the US dollar. This week, the South Sudan's government started auctioning $8 million per week to commercial banks and forex exchange bureaus to strengthen the local currency and stabilize prices. But as CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports, commodity prices remain high.
South Sudan depends largely on commodities imported from neighboring Kenya, Sudan and Uganda. Many residents in the capital Juba say prices of basic goods continue to rise.
Always when we try to ask the trader, they are telling us they are being overtaxed by the authority. City council take a lot of money from them. So when we ask them, can you reduce it? No, but the dollar has now come down. They said no, the dollar has come down, but the government, they are taking too much money from them. Central government, they are complaining, taking money, city council. So there's no way they can reduce the market. And they are being told to reduce the price, they cannot reduce it. So this is really the challenge we are seeing here. It's making life very difficult. The prices are going up, the salary is not being increased.
The government has not paid salaries for civil servants for months.
Now the dollar is losing value against South Sudanese pounds, but commodity prices are high. A sack of maize flour is more than my salary, let alone the other expenses like rent, medical bills and so on. The government should increase salaries for us civil servants, otherwise we cannot afford to live in this country.
South Sudan's government says it is trying to clear salary arrears for civil servants and will then review the payment structure.
The East African landlocked country heavily depends on oil to finance its budget, but a reduction in oil production from 185,000 barrels per day to 170,000 barrels per day due to COVID-19 disruptions has negatively impacted revenue generation.
The cost of different goods here also differs from one market to the other. South Sudan's central bank says it is working to try and harmonize prices.
Our commitment to ensure that there is stability in the economy, that the exchange rate is stable, that the prices are stable, and of course, under the framework of peace, that there is peace in the country. That's the conducive, environment, business environment that allow economic sectors, including banks, to lend.
The government is also promising to engage traders to find ways of reducing prices to make life easier for South Sudanese who frequent markets like this one. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Let's go to Uganda now, where authorities are concerned about tobacco use among young people. The country's tobacco control program says knowing the effects of smoking could push young smokers to quit the habit. CGTN's Leon Senyange reports.
Charles Sawali, like many teenage boys, wanted to feel cool. He picked up one habit, smoking.
It's basically peer pressure. Got caught up with a couple of friends and puberty. It's considered cool, the rebels in school and things like that. Plus I come from a family where with quite a bit of smokers, and my father was a smoker, my older brothers.
But after more than 15 years of smoking cigarettes, he decided to quit. It was indeed a tough journey.
It was a one-day decision, but a stretched out struggle, very stretched out. It's not like you say I've quit today and then that's it. You're going to have moments where you'll do half a cigarette, then you really regret, and it's a mental thing. And for me to really say I quit, I had to do about 2 months of going straight, clean 2 months.
10 years on, Sawali has stayed true to his word. According to health experts, many young people attempting to quit smoking cigarettes are instead opting for what they consider the less harmful alternatives, like e-cigarettes that are finding their way on the market here. Despite a government ban, the most common and inexpensive option is the highly addictive shisha, a multi-stemmed instrument with flavored tobacco. This year's World No Tobacco Day theme is Commit to Quit, a challenge for for many young people.
There are going to be certain difficulties or barriers, like there will be people around them who don't think it's such a big problem. There will be what we call triggers in the environment, which remind them or make them want to keep using the tobacco.
Uganda's tobacco control program has continuously rolled out campaigns against tobacco use. Its efforts are paying off.
We did a survey, we call it the Global Youth Tobacco Survey. We had one in 2012 and another one in 2018. We repeated one in 2018. And we noted that we had reduced tobacco use amongst young people from 17% in 2012 to 11, I think it's 10-point-something% in 2018, that recent one. So we feel that that is something that is good on our side because we've put out quite a lot of information to these young people.
As for Sewali, quitting smoking remains one of the proudest moments of his life. For a million more, the message to quit seems more urgent now than ever before. Leon Sanyanga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
And coming up in your sports news. Japan's top medical advisor is set to issue the views of medical experts on holding the Olympics.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Right, we start in Japan, where top medical advisor to the government, Shigeru Omi, says he plans to issue the views of medical experts on holding the Tokyo Olympics amid the coronavirus pandemic. Omi made the comment at a parliamentary meeting, adding the report will be out by June 20th. Earlier, Omi had issued strong warnings over what he characterized as a lack of discussion within the government and organizing committee over how to control